Now, people might be a bit confused and say, what are you talking about? Cho-Cho in North America, how'd this happen? Well, the Vietnam War happened, and the Vietnam War stopped. And when the Vietnam War came to a crashing halt, and you had the withdrawal in 1973 and the final evacuation in 1975, you had all kinds of Vietnamese boat people who came to the United States by the tens of thousands. Now, of all of those immigrants, we remember many of them were people who had cooperated with the Americans to fight the communists, the Montagnards, the Hmong, all these Laotian tribes. And of course, they were brought over, as far as the High Command was concerned, simply as food for the Cho-Cho. Psychic chattel, cattle for them to psychically feed off of through their attacks. Because in Laos, all of the Laotian Hmong tribesmen have a central pillar in their villages which they would sacrifice animals to. And they would sacrifice these animals and bleed them onto the blood column so that their ancestors would be fed and placated, and their ancestors would guard them in their sleep from the ravages of the Cho-Cho. When the Hmong and the Laotians were brought over to the United States, there was nothing in the cities, architecturally or otherwise, that would equate to a central pillar which they could make sacrifice onto to protect their communities. And I could hear them die in their sleep. When I grew up in the Tenderloin of San Francisco, now known as Little Saigon, that's like a Chinatown for the Vietnamese in San Francisco. I grew up in one of the largest ghetto complexes, known as El Cerrito Apartments. It still stands today. I believe it's 270 Turk Street. And on 270 Turk Street, where the El Cerrito apartment stands, is one of the largest complexes, what the San Francisco Police Department used to call the compound, in the entire Tenderloin ghetto, which was called the Tenderloin because the cops who cruised it got hazard pay and could afford tenderloin steak every night. So you've got this horrible situation in which the Laotian, the Hmong tribesmen were dumped out of Vietnam as the offal of war. They're trying to adapt to an entirely urban environment when they were all country people. I could hear them screaming in their sleep at night while they died because they were all suffering sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome. Now, they claimed that they were visited by Da Cho, or what's spelled as Dabsog, D-A-B-T-S-O-G, and Da Cho was, of course, this horrible death spirit that was represented by its worshippers, the Cho-Choa. Now, we airlifted over 100,000 Hmong, Laotian, various other kinds of tribes, the Montagnards, to the United States, and with them, we imported 40,000 Cho-Choa into the United States and Canada. Now, you might say, how'd they pull that off? How could they do that without people recognizing who are all these pygmies? Well, that's quite easy. That was due to Operation Baby Lift. Operation Baby Lift happened when you had SPOVO, its original term, Support for Vietnamese Orphans, organized by all these American volunteer agencies who wanted to bring all of these Vietnamese orphans who were Amerasians, the products of black or American rape of Vietnamese prostitutes, created all of these half-breed hybrid kids that the communists were going to exterminate. So many churches said, we've got to bring them to the United States or they're all going to die. They'll be killed by the communists. So they had entire cargo planes that they were able to arrange to airlift thousands of babies back to the United States. So in April of 1975, with the fall of Saigon and the North Vietnamese Army cheering up that entire area, the Presidio military base where I worked became the destination for at least 1,300 tiny refugees, infants, that came through Operation Baby Lift, or SPOVO. Now, World Airways lifted them to California, and then military planes, cargo planes, were in assistance, and they would actually fill these military cargo planes with shoeboxes that they would put the infants in so they could carry hundreds in the plane at a time because they were desperate and the situation was urgent. The Presidio military base converted this entire drill center, this large hall known as Harmon Hall Reserve Center, into a nursery. And they brought in doctors, nurses, cooks, drivers, security, 24-hour shifts, all volunteers. And they basically turned this gymnasium-like facility into a large infant nursery until these kids could all be adopted out. Well, in the middle of all that, there was this horrible tragedy. This United States Air Force cargo plane was carrying 243 Vietnamese infants in shoeboxes, 38 nurses, all of them volunteers, a couple of school teachers. So he had about 40 women on board, and they all died with the children when a bomb went off, and it was raining babies from the sky over Saigon on April 4th of 1975. And that's when the CIA stepped in and said, oh, we can't take these infants anymore. It's too dangerous. So we can bring in these 3-foot, 4-foot kids, these really ugly looking kids who all look like they have Methuselah syndrome and no hair. We want to bring them to the United States because these kids are all like progeria and Methuselah syndrome and shit. And the communists are going to kill them all because they're biologically deformed. And so we got to bring them to the United States out of mercy. Well, these were all Choctaw. And they brought them into the United States, 40,000 of them, and they had to feed. So at night, they fed off all these Laotian and Hmong tribesmen that were all in area in the same apartment building as me. And I know exactly what their symptoms were. They were described by the woman who ultimately was dealing with this problem, a medical anthropologist by the name of Dr. Shelley Adler. And Dr. Shelley Adler convinced Congress and the U.S. government this was a real problem. She said, look, 70% of the Hmong tribesmen and Laotians who have fled the Vietnam War are dead. The Cho have attacked 60% of all the Laotians and Vietnamese refugees in the United States. Every single male has been attacked by the Chichewa and has experienced a near-death experience or a near-Sun's experience, and many of them have died. Now, that's 3 times the normal United States population experience of the old hag syndrome. Now, she pointed out the fact that this was due to the central pillar. There was no central pillar in American houses or apartments for them to conduct sacrifices onto. And so first the government said, we'll convert them to Christianity. They won't believe that crap. But it turned out that any of the Hmong who converted to Christ and abandoned their native spirit traditions had the highest fatality of death rate of all. 72% death ratio. So she said it doesn't work. They can't convert to Christ. We have to put them into the countryside where we can set up refugee camps. They can have village and clan groups and make their sacrifices to their ancestral pillar, or they're all going to die off and you're going to be responsible for genocide. So finally Congress funded a rural exodus into the countryside of the Hmong tribesmen and the Laotian refugees in 1981, between 1979 to 1981. And they began to make their sacrifices again, go back to their native traditions, and they stopped dying. And it was around that time that the symptoms of Sun's sudden unexpected nocturnal death syndrome began to be categorized, documented by Dr. Shelley Adler, because she had been working with this to convince Congress. And she said, the Da are known to be monsters beneath the earth who venture forth at night, but they're really something else. She couldn't identify what it was, but she said whatever it was caused, in the first stage of invasion of someone's bedroom or their place of sleep, a sense of panic, extreme fear, a second stage of paralysis, a third stage of chest pressure, a fourth stage of a sense of alien presence in the room that was neither animal nor human nor spirit, and the fifth stage was a sensational disturbance, auditory, visual, tactile. And finally, the sixth stage was you'd wake up dead. And so she categorized all this. All of this is on record. All of this is vetable. People can look this up. And people, the only thing they're not going to be able to find out is, well, what happened? So they put all these people out in the countryside, and they all stopped dying. What happened to the Chichewa? Well, aside from the fact that the triads, which is an Asian word for a criminal underworld gang or mafia type of cabal, the Cho triads run much of the Asiatic crime scene in the greater San Francisco Bay Area. That's why when I was working as a cop, I said, you people need to bring in translators who speak Cho-Cho. And I knew one, and I brought it to him. I said, this man speaks Cho-Cho. I have seen the Cho-Cho. My father had seen them in China. When I first saw the Cho-Cho,